Hello, everyone. We are Astrano. My name is King.
I'm Grace.
I'm Neff.
Hey everyone, I'm Mela.
I'm Becca.
And today we're going to talk about the shadow work. Ooh. So, before we begin, I just want to say I think that the shadow topic is it's a very deep topic, and right now we're just gonna scratch the surface on what it is. So let's get started. First, this is what I found from Google. We'll explain what I found on Google of what shadow is, and then we can kind of go around and see what our interpretation of what the shadow is. So according to Carl Jung, the shadow self is the unconscious part of the personality that our conscious ego doesn't want to identify in itself. It represents traits of yourself that you think are unpleasant, bad, immoral by society, or parts of your personality that you don't consciously recognize. It's the trait that when we first expressed were ridiculed, shunned, or met with punishment, sometimes also repressed positive and life-promoting characteristics. So, these are the things that kind of like in the back of our hand. And the way I see it, I think shadow is kind of like, how there's this thing in business where it's like the thing that you know, the thing that you don't know, and that sometimes shadow is like the thing that you don't know. So that's how I see it, and it's like there's a huge part of that we don't know, and that's how I kind of see it. So the shadow for me is that, and also like the things that I find like unpleasant for me, like it's like it brings an uncomfortable feeling whenever I express it. But yeah, so what's your thoughts on shadow, guys? What is shadow in your interpretation?
Off the bat, to me, even just based off what you're saying, it feels like judgment, like how we judge ourselves. And I believe most of the shadow is based off of conditioning and programming that we've been told how we're supposed to be or what others would expect of us. And it kind of creates this persona that isn't you. And then, I don't know, like with a lot of people, there's anger, sadness, fear. When we have trauma as a childhood, you'll grow up and you'll have all of these parts of you that you don't really recognize as yourself. And I feel that is the shadow, and it's not about pushing it away and being like, no, I'm not this, I can't, I don't accept this. It's more so about seeing it and kind of like the inner child healing that we've been doing and that Neff did a video on. Just like seeing it and loving it and be like, I accept you. And even if society would see that as not positive or not a good way to exist, I think it's all about self-acceptance. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. For me, the shadow is kind of just like, that's always what we're dealing with when we're doing the healing work. It's always dealing with the wounds, which are the shadow self, dealing with the falling consciousness within, right? And why? Like, just because it's like a natural, like Grace is saying, it's a natural organic thing to want to like evolve back to who you truly are and back to source, if you want to call it that, or God. As we get closer to that, you drop more of the illusion, you drop more of what's not you. And yeah, it's great to have the perspective of like, it's not a bad thing, that the shadow exists. It's part of this experience. It's part of the experience of life when you're in the lower dimensions, just because of how, life works. And like, you're living this like separation from God. And that's just like, the frequencies that come out from that separation is a lot of these nasty shadow aspects. So like for me, all of those shadow aspects are just different degrees of separation. I think everything comes from separation, right? Like that's all wounds come from that place of being separate. So it's really just this journey of like reminding those pieces that think they're separate, like, hey, you're not, I love you, you're connected to me, like come back home. So for me, yeah, like that's the shadow, is separation.
I love that.
I want to add into it before you guys kind of say your part, because I really do love that. And it's like one thing that I kind of reminds me of, it's like the separation happens, I think, is when the trauma occurs, and then it's like you don't feel safe, and so all of a sudden something has to like happen within you, and that's when like you like split into two things, and then that's when the shadow starts to be created, and then it develops into something, you know, if you know, it's like with rage and like people with like anger issue or whatever, there's a part of them that or like people, I don't know, there's a lot, there's so many things here, but I'll put with one example here. It's like so let's say sexuality, right? So sometimes I'll just give my example so it's easier, but like for me, I had this struggle where it's just like I had trouble expressing my sexuality, because at a young age, you know, when I tried to express it, my mom was just like, "Hey, that's bad," you know, because you know, I was like, "Yeah, no, it's just like, hey, I'm a guy, I'm trying to do this," but now I'm grateful that I've slowly integrated that, healed that, and I've learned to accept it, and it's just like, yeah, I knew exactly when that separation happened. It was when at that moment where, you know, I'll go into it later, but you know that it's like.
That's crazy. Yeah. You don't know how many times I've heard that story of a kid like being told like don't touch that part or whatever, you know, and like that starts the wound of like separating from your sexuality. That's interesting.
Yeah. What is shadow to you, ladies?
I think about my shadow is like whenever I'm having one of those days and you just like say something in your head and you're like, ooh, why would I say that? You're like, who is this other person inside of me? I don't know too much about, I haven't jumped into the shadow work for myself personally, but I know today I caught myself thinking something, you know, and I was like, whoa, what is this? So I'm very curious, honestly, to try and start the process of diving into it a little bit more, for sure.
Yeah, shadow, it's so interesting because it's really the dark versus the light, and it's not talked a lot about in the spiritual community because it's all light. You're like flooded with it. But we have to have time to work on our shadow self because we all have it inside of ourselves. It's just what you're feeding, right? So I can feed my shadow self and like feed that vibe and that frequency, and that's the level I'm going to be on. Or I can feed, you know, this angelic side, this light side, and that's what I'm going to get out of it, right? So you have to be able to work with your shadow self and like know that it's there, and start the healing. And like what you're saying, King, it's so cool and amazing that you can actually remember being a child and remembering that situation that, you know, started a little bit of that shadow self. Like, why? It's like that curiosity, right? You know, so it's an interesting thing that I think we should all be talking about for sure.
So does our shadow ever leave us?
I don't think so. I feel like here's the thing, right? I feel like it's the light and the shadow, it's two sides of the same coin, and I think what we have, it's the integration, you know, it's the part where we learn to accept them and learn how to bring them into our life. And so I'm not like, that's actually a great question, so I'm gonna jump into, you know, how do you develop that shadow, you know, how do you integrate that in your life. And let me go here. So before I go, I'm gonna say this part by Edward Whitman, and it's like, it goes like this: the shadow, when it's realized, is the source of renewal. When there is an impasse and sterile time in our lives, despite an adequate ego development, we must look to the dark, here to an acceptable side which has been at our conscious disposal. So I guess, you know, what I'll go into is like, how do we, for me now, how I've learned to integrate that part of me, right? So let's say with the sexual part, right? So I've learned to harness that energy. I've learned to accept and realize, hey, you know what, I am just sexual, you know, and that's normal. And I've learned to like really be okay with that and sit with that and just like, hey, there's no more guilt, because that's what plagued me before, was just like this guilt of like, if I even think about like being sexual with someone, I just have this guilt, and I'm like, oh, and then I kept asking myself like, why, like, what's going on, like, what's going, and it took a while for that work to happen, but then it clicked. It's like, oh, because when I was a young boy, as like I saw like this porn thing, and I was just like watching it, I was just like, oh, and I was 4 at that time too, so I was just like, it clicked like very.
That's
there was
so
back
young.
then there was no internet, there was CD. So I was a curious kid. I was just like, oh my god, let me just pick this, put it in, like, oh, yeah,
from the library.
Oh my god.
From the library, yeah. So it was just like intense.
The DVD
but
library.
the DVDs, yeah, holy shoot. But yeah, and also here it's very cool. This is by Carl Jung. He says, by not being aware of having a shadow, you declare a part of your personality to be non-existent. That then it enters the kingdom of the non-existent, which swells up and takes an enormous proportions. If you don't get rid of the qualities you don't like by denying them, you become more and more unaware of what you are. You declare yourself more and more non-existence, and your devils will grow fatter and fatter. And this one too is, this is one thing that I saw with myself, right? It's like, when I didn't feel like, when I had that guilt, I went to porn. Like, that's, because I couldn't express myself to the ladies, so I had to like get it out of my system. I went to porn, and that was, guys, like, for gentlemen out there, it's gonna destroy your life if you. So just don't do it, But there's no other avenue that I found. But that's the dark part of it. It's just like when you caught in with that dark side, like, it was eating me up because it was just like feeding off that. But then when I learned to like realize, hey, it's okay, like, I can feel myself being, horny or whatever, but I'll just sit in with it, and I'll just like sit and just like I'll just laugh and giggle for like 15 minutes. Just like, oh, this feels so nice. I'll just sit here with this, and then it'll pass, and then I move on, and with this refreshed energy and like boost and vitality, and yeah, it's like.
We also have to remember the things that are going to haunt us the greatest are going to be opposite, more powerful. So what I'm saying is that darkness that controls you, the power that you can harness from bringing in light and healing is so much more powerful than any of the dark shit, right? So the darkness is going to hold you back from your actual power because it festers. You're not actually doing anything with it. It's like something is controlling you. But if you can have control over it, whatever it is, and harness that power for good or whatever it is, these things change, even in sexual things as well. Because like for me, I actually had a huge porn problem, like for a lot of my.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, it's like
the guilt. But, sorry, continue.
It's just it's such an icky thing. It's such a dirty thing. You're like literally giving your most powerful sacred energy to nothingness, and like not even.
That's where the
like,
guilt comes from.
That is the guilt, because
if
you're
you
giving away your energy.
Yeah,
you're like freely giving it away, and you're like, what's happening with it? What does that do to you? Right? So it's kind of cool, even with like masturbation and stuff like that, you can actually masturbate and harness the energy by not thinking about
you just like put the energy towards your intention.
Yeah, your good intention.
Your intention is,
you have to like train yourself in order to in order to do that.
He's like, I don't think I'm gonna be celibate anymore.
No.
Just kidding.
It's just about harnessing the power and using it for like just better, like there's no guilt in bringing light and bringing energy that is good and whole, and there's no guilt in that. We feel guilt because we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing, and we know we shouldn't be doing it, right? Otherwise we wouldn't feel guilty, right?
I think guilt is, Grace, when you sent us that chart of like emotions. It was a scale. Do you remember that chart that you sent us?
Mhm.
And like guilt and shame. What was the name of, like, what was it? The name
It's
of
just
the
a
chart?
frequency chart.
Frequency chart,
So
yeah.
like it's like guilt and shame are the lowest frequencies, even lower than fear or like any of the other like lower frequencies.
And
Yeah.
it'll fester in you and just grow. But it's kind of fucked up because it'll cause you to repeat that same cycle of like, yeah, want it, guilt. Trip. Okay, want it, guilt, trip. And it's just a cyclical cycle. It goes over and over and over again. Where are you getting like that? Right? You're just digging yourself a hole of despair. So crazy.
How does someone get out of that? Like, from, you know?
It's the healing. I mean, for me, I had such a problem getting out of things because I didn't have an avenue to put myself into. Like, sure, I have music and like hobbies and stuff, but there was nothing that was fully completing my life because we are working these 9-to-5 jobs. We're like doing things that are so unfulfilling. So I think if you find something that can fulfill you in life, you're not going to go searching for things that'll fulfill little parts of it, right?
I truly believe that the era that we live in right now is just so much stimulation constantly. So whenever I'm saying I need to be off my phone, it's exactly what you're saying. It takes your energy and it doesn't give you anything. So how do we break that cycle, King? What are we gonna do to get out of this?
Yeah.
So many things that you can do. So I think that's the kind of the point we're trying to make. Everything just takes some work.
For me, I've just kind of like, I use the awareness, right? It's like, you know, and the triggering parts too, like I would gonna go back like, okay, what actually triggered me to have these thoughts like right now? It's let's say it's 12 midnight, I'm in my bed, and all of a sudden I have this like urge to just, you know, do it. And I go back and I'm like, what happened? Oh, okay, it's, you know, I saw this girl and we had this, you know, thing, and I'm just like, okay, no, that's good, just appreciated that, let it go. And then once I do that, I just kind of like breathe in, you know, just breathe it in. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's good. I love you, buddy. Yeah, I know, I see you. You want to procreate. I appreciate you, but I'm gonna sleep, you know. And it's like, you know, going back to that, that's how you integrate the shadow, right? It's, you have to really love and accept it and give it compassion and really just create that space for it to fully express itself without your judgment. And it's like, once the shadow is, it's like, once the shadow can play freely without any judgment, then it kind of just, do you need me? I'm here. You know, I'm just here. It doesn't control you anymore.
I could see that in a sense of like, you know, you need darkness in order to be able to like really see light and like see the difference. I get it. So yeah. It's very interesting because, I don't think your shadow self ever does really go away. It's whether you, like you're kind of saying, King, it's whether you choose to, like, you know, like, hey, I don't really need you right now, instead of just, like, doing something, you know? Instead of the shadow self controlling you are controlling it and deciding to do something better.
The only reason that we are in a place where we need to have darkness per se and light is because the third dimension is a place of duality. So because we're in the density that we are, it's hard, we can't just have light. Like, we're close to the lower density levels, so we're closer to those beings that do fester in this darkness, and they do feed off of that. So it's like, it's a very interesting time in humanity because we're kind of coming out of it. So when we witness the ego or this density coming up, it's like an acknowledgement that can occur, and then it can be like, no, I see you, I love you, but I'm not this is how I feel, like, I'm not like needing you. I don't I accept where you've been, I accept the trauma that you're experiencing. It's like, we also talk a lot as a group, like, about when we have darker experiences, like per se an entity or an energy comes in, you give them love. You say, I see you, and then they disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you give darkness or this negative energy to this being, it is like a parasite. Like it just gets bigger and it grows. And I think it's the same way with the shadow, where in which we can acknowledge it and give it love so that it can transform. Because I feel that the 3D right now where we're at is a place to transform, is a place to continue up leveling to higher dimensions. And it is just that ability to be courageous enough to see the darkness in yourself and say, I love you and I accept you, so that we can continue rising.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I
Totally.
Yeah, I think so.
I definitely agree with that. I think that we are in a dense place. Polarity consciousness, from my own personal belief, does not go all the way up. You know what I mean? Like, we definitely can evolve away from polarity consciousness. But yeah, that's what we're in right now. It's part of the shadow work, is like dealing with that, right? Like that which is experiencing these illusionary like delusions within this reality, like these massive schisms, right? And yeah, like we're in a really dark space on this planet. Like we've all come here to like really heal an intense schism, an intense fragmentation within our universe, within, you know, like all of us collectively kind of thing. So it's a big job. And like the shadow, it's like, yes, we need to learn about the shadow. We need to befriend the shadow. We need to love this space. And like for me in my own personal healing journey lately, they're my guides and my healings. They're really showing me how to like bring my light into spaces in the universe when I'm doing grid work. So I like go in and I step right into the center of the dark spaces around our universe and like bring your light into those spaces. So you can do that within your body as well. Like bring that light back into that empty space, right? And stand there and just love and shine that love, because that is going to fill the space up back with who you truly are, which is, you know what I mean, these higher frequencies of love, connection, unity, consciousness, joy, you know. And yeah, it's just part of the experience. Like obviously Source wanted to experience extreme separation, so here we are, y'all. Welcome to the party.
You know? Yeah, just one thing, but no, totally. And it's interesting because the way I see it too is like, you know, with light, when you cast light upon a shadow, the shadow disappears. You know, and sometimes when you cast your light and you see that the big shadow, it turns out it's just like this tiny creature, just scared.
Yes.
Tiny little creature scared for his life.
Yeah.
And that's why he's trying to portray that big shadow, that he's big, scary, because he's just afraid. And you know,
Amen.
And that's what I'm kind of seeing with like all the like entities that came in my field like lately, is when you know, first they're scary, but when you give them love, they transmute. And then just like, oh, just so innocent being, go on, you know.
Yes.
And it's like, wow.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Ooh, that brings up a really big point that's been coming up with me and Grace lately, and we've been talking about it. But the same frequency, like we can get so consumed by our wounds. We can get so consumed by, like, you know, almost being over dramatic about these experiences, because we don't have connection to our oversoul, to how powerful we are, and the amount of love that's actually within your soul is like so immense. It can so easily heal like timelines of war. Totally. It can so easily heal, you know, huge traumas that have happened in your life. And that's not to say like we should just like, you know, be like, okay, let's heal this right away. Like it's definitely like we accept, we love, we allow the wounds to have space. But we can swing too far in that spectrum of just being like stuck in the dark, stuck in the shadow, stuck in the victimhood. Because on this planet, that's probably the number one, like one of the 3 pillars that they use against humanity is the victimizer programming. They want you looping. They want you feeling like you're a victim, like you have no power, like you're stuck in these wounds. And you know what I mean? So if we can kind of sway back yeah, if we can kind of sway back, I've been doing this for my own self personally too. Like with some of my wounds, they do really feel like they've been so hurt, which they have, but it's kind of like, yo, like we can move out of this, baby. Like you're okay. We're going to get you out of this. Like it's going to be pretty easy. Here we go. You know? And like you can heal this stuff. So don't get too consumed by the environment we're in either.
And also like this is just coming up for me now. I feel like the more light you get, it kind of gives you the ability to see that, it's like you're in this realm, right? The 3 dimension. The more you go to the light, the more I feel like the more darkness will be attracted to you, because they just need to be seen. They need that love too, so like the higher you go, the people here are like, yo, we need that guy. So you're gonna kind of, I don't know, but that's just kind of how I feel. It's like I feel like if the more light you get, the more things will come to you randomly, just because like they need some help.
Yeah, and you can feel the difference too, like in terms of the people that you're around. It's interesting. You can feel way more density the lighter you get. Like you become way more susceptible.
Very much so.
Like it's like placing a rock on a balloon. Like you're just like, oh god. Like you can just feel everything. Like it. But also, I guess, and it is the reason that starseeds, angelics, higher dimensional beings have come here to hold so much space for these, for people, for everybody, for each other, so that we can raise it, because we can feel so much and hold so much, but it is definitely mastery.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to, yeah, because like most of us are very empathetic or very like sensitive. So it's definitely a state of balance. And yeah, like even when you come into that victimizer, which is super common, like Neff said, it's like, yeah, like giving yourself back to God. And I think that's the same thing with guilt, is what I have been practicing lately, is like, okay, I feel this way, but I'm just gonna like, nothing fucking matters. Like it's whatever. Like I just give it back to God, and I act in the way that I am most aligned to what makes me feel the most light, the most like that balloon that can provide light and space for everybody else.
Yikes.
And then you'll get the weight thrown on you once in a while, but
totally, yeah.
I
So
love that, Grace.
just before we end this podcast, guys, what's your let's say someone's kind of struggling integrating their shadow, and they're like getting frustrated. What's the one thing that you would tell them to kind of help them begin that process of healing and integration? So for me, it would just be acceptance and compassion to yourself. So whenever you have these thoughts, or you see yourself being a certain way, just accept, compassion, and give yourself the space to feel whatever you have to feel.
For me, it's been this kind of not severe, but like intense process of lately. It's like, if we're gonna hit rock bottom, let's hit rock bottom. And I'm just gonna die. Like, and it's like the ego, and it's actually saved me so much the last while, because I can get super caught up in my head. I'm extremely sensitive, and I take on everybody's shit. So a lot lately, I've just been like, okay, I die to God. Like, I don't fucking need any of this. Like, you can hold so much love in your body, and if it doesn't feel good to you, just cry and just give it to God and just release it and love yourself. And just come to that like rebirthing that comes when you just bawl your eyes out for a couple hours.
I love that.
Do you ladies want to go first?
Some kind of pill that you could take so you could cry. I do not cry enough. I'm just like trying to hold back the tears sometimes. Or it doesn't come out. But that's a good one, Grace. It's a really good release, probably, if you're...
Yeah, it's so interesting that, like, I think it's the heart thing, because I think we have to turn ourselves off sometimes, because, well, I mean, I do. Sometimes if I'm around people and I'm like, I'm gonna cry right now in the superstore, it's like, no. Yeah. So I think we become so numb, we have to numb ourselves a lot, and then it's like, how do I cry? How do I feel? So it's like kind of reteaching ourselves to become as sensitive and feeling as we are
Yeah.
innately.
Yeah.
But what about you guys? What would you give advice?
I would say don't be too hard on yourself. We're all going through life trying our best, and you know what? Like, if you are trying and taking the steps to try and make your life better, keep going. And it's okay if you fuck it up.
Yeah.
Just keep going, because you know, like, don't let that stuff hold you back. It's okay to like slip up and, you know, make mistakes, but yeah, don't be too hard on yourself. Love yourself.
Yeah, throughout this journey, I've definitely recognized that we're not here to be perfect. We're here to live this human experience. So, of course, that's going to involve a lot more stepping stones than someone obviously like living with God in heaven or something like that. But I'm
So
coming
nice up
to you
there.
soon. I don't know. It's not been easy. Like, we all know this purge has been like, I think the one thing that I would suggest is like food is huge. Everything that you put into your body, it really does affect you in the ways that you just never thought. Like I've noticed now that if I eat too much onions and garlic, which is weird, and like spicy stuff, like I'm spicy. Like, it makes me like tempery and fiery. So I don't know, maybe just try taking some stuff out sometimes. I don't really know.
Cool off.
Experiment.
Yeah, try it out, see what works for you. Yep.
I love that.
That's hilarious. Yeah, for me, like, it's always like, if I can't change something, and I will probably say this a bajillion times on this podcast, but it's always like going in and reconnecting that part, doing the wound healing, instead of like fighting your external reality, like trying to change certain parts of your ego, like trying to cut things out, you know, or do things that you haven't done before. Like, it's not gonna last, like Melania said before, unless you've cultivated that love within yourself for it to fully shift within first, and then it's just naturally gonna happen externally. And so, yeah, this is the whole journey, guys. It's all shadow integration. It's all deep healing work. And that starts with you just like communicating with those spaces and places and parts, bringing that love back in, bringing the light back into those spaces, right? Like, that's the reconnection. We need to start reconnecting everything. And so the biggest thing for me, it would be like, you guys can tap into your like highest self, okay? Or your oversoul, okay? And tap into that love that it has for you. Bring it into your body, okay? Because we've been so disconnected from what true love is, and you need to relearn that frequency. You need to bring that pure frequency of your highest aspects back down into your body and back into those spaces that are hurting and are in pain, paying attention to them, witnessing them. So yeah, just start that process. Start small and get her done.
Get her done.
Get her done, guys. All right. And with that, thank you for listening. We'll see you soon.